Greetings and salutations. My name is Carrie Bailey. This is COMM271 Introduction to Mass Media with Professor Johnny Rowing. It's week 5, so this must be my PowerPoint presentation vlog. This week, Johnny assigned us 2 videos. The first video, Media Literacy, Media Ethics. The second video, A River Below, the Ethics of Activism in the Modern Media Age. Continuing the conversation this week with regard to mass media communication and media literacy, once again, the topic of ethics has come up. Although this week, you're up for a treat. Both videos absolutely discuss the media, journalism, reporting, and ethics, yet it's not about the dolphins. In general, we could say that there are ethical codes of conduct which apply to all media professionals. However, as we saw in the first video, about between 11 and 12 minutes, Michelle Fleming explains to us some of her own personal experiences that she encountered with ethical dilemmas during the time that she was a journalist. In fact, Michelle tells us, and I quote, "Journalists are not mandated by any overseers." And so what that means, unmandated, means there are no requirements for licensing. There is no one that oversees them, like the example that Michelle gave with the AMA. AMA is there to make sure that the doctors are doing their jobs the way that they're supposed to be. But in terms of the media, journalists, reporters, etc., there is no such entity. For the most part, I think that we could say, in terms of journalism, journalists and reporters seem to be held to a higher standard. According to former Vice President of News and Programming for a local TV news station, at about 15.5 minutes, Wayne Lynch tells us, and I quote, "Individuals with unethical reputations tend to get fired and in turn not hired for work." Well, I guess that means that all of the names and faces that we encounter today must be ethical. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, there are ethical codes of conduct to which media professionals ought to subscribe, but once again, they are not required to. In fact, at about 21 minutes and 32 seconds into the film, Michelle Fleming says, according to the SPJ, which is the Society of Professional Journalism handbook, quote, "Deception should only be used when all other means have been exhausted." Well, journalists and media might not be required to have a license, but the SPJ certainly gave the media a license to deceive when they included this particular code in their handbook. And so this brings us to the Johnny question, week 5, video 1. Johnny, do you think licensure would make a difference in how current information is received and or distributed? In other words, if journalists were to be mandated, do you think it would make a difference? If so, how? If not, how not? If so, why? If not, why not? This brings us to week 5, video 2, A River Below, the Ethics of Activism in the Modern Media age. Now, this was a 2017 documentary. As you can see from this screen capture taken from Canopy, apparently this documentary was nominated for Best Documentary Feature at the Tribeca Film Festival. Now, perhaps I'm just a cynical skeptic, but I found this film to be quite the opposite. Insight 1. Deconstructing Richard Says. 13 specific points that led me to conclude that Richard Rasmussen is unethical and that I am biased. Now, Johnny, please note that I have expanded this insight to be shown over the next 3 consecutive slides for the purpose of time, concision, and quality. As you will see, the following slides are numbered and each part is of equal importance, and as such, each one has a descriptive APA header. Deconstructing Richard Says, Part 1 of 3, the first 6 signs. So as you can see, I've highlighted the different timestamps wherein Richard Rasmussen has made comments that I felt strongly enough to write down, make note of, and then compile in this presentation. Deconstructing Richard Says, 6 more reasons. Again, as you can see, the timestamps are highlighted and the comments are there. And at 46:44, Richard Rasmussen says to the camera, "It's not about the dolphins." All right, part 3 of 3, last critical insight for part 1. Now, after being confronted by who Richard called the motherfucking California cameramen, when he was presented with a rebuttal from the villagers of the Amazon, when they were giving their responses to Fantastico and how it aired on television, how they were lied to, and specifically how they had been tricked by Richard, which in turn affected their livelihoods. Right around 56 minutes and 28 seconds, Richard says, "Where were you when I was there fucking myself? Where were you?" And he's really, really angry. And as if that were not enough, after using several logical fallacies to try to fool the villagers again into thinking that he, Richard, was just as much of a victim as they were. As a caveat, at an hour and 15 minutes into the film, very close to the end, Richard Rasmussen says, "I'm influential. People will listen to me." As he poses, waves, and smiles for all those motherfuckers from California, you know the ones. They exist behind the power of the camera and this film's subsequent editing. Wink, wink. Unethical is just me being polite. Very close, again, to the end of the film. An hour, 16 minutes, 15 seconds is where we see Richard inside of a building in the village of the Amazon, where he utilized the fishermen to help develop his documentary. He says very, very solemnly, "Hey, it's us, you guys and me. We are being used and tricked right now." And 1 second later, yet again, Richard is all smiles and looking directly into the camera while he continues to activate himself for his cause. Again, this is just me being polite and trying to be politically correct over this disturbing situation. Artifact-inspired activism, video 2, insight 3. So there's a clip, a very short clip, right around an hour, 19 minutes, 19 seconds of the artifact that inspired Richard's activism. This is taken from a cooking show, and it just so happened to be an episode that was airing on the consumption of mote fish. Hopefully that name sounds familiar to you. It was this show that ignited this scheme, and yes, I'm calling it a scheme because it is, in my opinion, and created a shitstorm in the form of impoverishment, which may appear to have effectively worked in Rasmussen's favor. I mean, my God, look at the reviews. He was nominated for a Tribeca Film Festival Award, for God's sake. But, in my opinion, this is crap. Okay, Johnny, I've stepped down off my soapbox. I just really had strong feelings while I was watching this, and I know that I tend to get very emotional and caught up, but I didn't know anything about this film until I watched it. It was after I watched it that I saw how popular people thought it was and how amazing, and even you, Johnny, glorified it and talked about it being an excellent example of media ethics. Now, I don't know what that means, but tell me if I'm wrong. Rasmussen created the facade that this documentary was meant to save the dolphins. But in fact, his activism was about saving the mote fish, or rather the pirarucu. I see this documentary as being highly unethical. This concludes my presentation for Week 5. Thank you in advance for your time and consideration regarding my thoughts and opinions related to the assigned videos. As always, Johnny, you know, you're always on the podium for me. I appreciate you very, very much.